Hello and welcome to this edition of Access Asia. Coming up, India uses controversial laws to crack down on dissent. NGOs are raided, bank accounts frozen, and thousands of activists are jailed. Japan faces its worst year of bear attacks in recent history. Experts say a multi-pronged approach is needed to save humans and protect the animals. And saved by the pandemic, with tourism and development disrupted, the precarious living situation of Thailand's Chalo people is spared, at least for now. Well, there are fears India, the world's largest democracy, has grown increasingly intolerant. Its critics range from the United Nations to Amnesty International. The country's ruling party has taken to labeling dissenters and activists as anti-nationals. 3 vaguely worded laws, including a controversially revised anti-terrorist measure, have led to a crackdown on dissent, with thousands of people being jailed.
Before the COVID-19 pandemic, this university in New Delhi was at the heart of nationwide protests against the Indian government. But on the very day that the lockdown was announced, authorities destroyed all signs of dissent.
This used to be a very vibrant, very beautiful, colorful place. Delhi police has used this coronavirus lockdown to curb the dissent on eradicate all the murals, all the graffitis that were like we have painted or students have painted. Government used this pandemic to, crush the dissent, crack down the dissent, and all the people who are active in protesting, mobilizing, they all are being framed as, rioters.
Earlier this year, India was divided by nationwide protests condemning a law deemed discriminatory against Muslims. The tension led to violent inter-religious clashes last February. No serious charges were filed against the Hindu right wing and police, despite a number of videos clearly demonstrating their involvement. The investigation carried out by authorities concluded that the riots were a conspiracy to destabilize the government. Law enforcement officials have since arrested dozens of dissenting voices, including students under a draconian anti-terrorism law. Months later, Samir took the risk to speak to us outside his university.
We just want to do an interview here. Small discussion, interview, 5 minutes.
So you can see the level of surveillance. If you are a student, even if you are standing outside the campus, a guard will come and ask you, do you have an I card? What are you doing here? You are not supposed to be here. Personally, I feel threatened to come here. I feel like I'm afraid. I fear for my security. Who dare to speak against this Hindu Nazi regime are being threatened, intimidated, that you might be put in jail. Message is loud and clear.
The Unlawful Activities Prevention Act was introduced in the early 1960s and has since been amended several times. This anti-terror law is often used by the Indian police to target critics of the state by labeling them terrorists. The Modi government amended it last year to allow the state to arrest individuals and detain them for up to 6 months without a trial or evidence. Activist Ravi Nair believes this law is being used to stifle dissent.
Because the clauses of the act are so vaguely defined, anything can be construed as a terrorist act, including mere expression of opinion. There is an attempt to take out people who dissent in any way, to tell the rest of the country that if you dissent, then you must pay the consequences. And this is the warning signal that goes under UAPA. This kind of act can only be enacted in North Korea or China, not in a country which calls itself the largest democratic country in the world.
Students, journalists, lawyers, at least 4,000 people have been arrested in the name of this anti-terrorist law over the past 4 years. Anti-caste activist and Professor Hani Babu is one of them. His wife and daughter have not seen him since his arrest in July.
See, now he's waving to us. Again he's waving. After this we saw him one more time when he was sent to jail.
I thought we'll get to meet more or, maybe bail or something. But yeah, it was sad, we couldn't even talk, we couldn't even meet each other. It was just like for 5 seconds we could say hi and bye.
They kept him there and they kept telling him that there are these folders we found in your computer which incriminates you. Now it looks like even doing anything within the university and trying to bring social justice within the university is also a criminal act. If an arrest, such a wrong and unjust arrest happens, there would have been huge protests. But by catching these people during COVID, they have actually avoided this. They have got away with it.
Jenny Rowena has had to spend a lot of money defending her husband in court. The hearings are constantly postponed because of the pandemic.
Keeping them in prison is a punishment because eventually they know that if it comes to trial, there's no evidence against most of these people and they are not going to be convicted. So they make them suffer, keep them away from their families, they make the families also suffer.
We reached out to the Delhi police for comments, but they didn't respond to our requests for an interview. With protests being curtailed during the pandemic, many have demanded a repeal of this anti-terrorism law deemed to be abusive and anti-democratic. Writer Arundhati Roy is a vocal critic.
If there is one thing that this panel must demand, it is the revocation of that law. Because that is not a law. That is just a loose collection of words which allows the state to charge anyone with anything and imprison them for months and years together.
Even if those currently imprisoned under this draconian law are never convicted of any wrongdoing, they are unlikely to ever receive reparations.
Sightings of wild bears in Japan have soared to their highest level in 5 years, while many northern regions are reporting the most seen in over a decade. It's led to a number of fatal attacks and scores of injuries. As Yuka Roye explains, there are multiple factors behind the increased number of bear sightings.
Wolves may have disappeared from Japan about a century ago, but now this high-tech, furry animal is howling day and night to ward off dangerous wild beasts. Takikawa City in Hokkaido is one of the towns that have introduced the robot wolf, following alarming numbers of human-bear encounters.
We received a call from a resident who saw a bear out the window of her home. We never had bears come near people, but now the risk of human casualty was becoming high.
According to the Ministry of Environment, almost 14,000 bear sightings have been reported in Japan so far this year. Around 140 people have been injured, some fatally. A shortage of acorns may have drawn the animals closer to towns and cities in search of food. But experts point to a wider problem of urban flight in this aging society. As rural villages have become deserted, boundaries have disappeared, expanding wildlife habitats to dangerous levels.
Monkeys, bears, wild boars and deer are roaming around everywhere. On the other hand, hunters are aging and disappearing, and rural populations are dwindling. Japan is becoming a wildlife haven, or rather, a beast kingdom.
Younger bears that grew up near urban areas are less afraid of humans or cars. In October, staff were evacuated from this shopping centre in Kaga City after a large beast wandered inside and stayed there for 13 hours before it was shot dead. Though within the government's culling quotas, the number of bears killed last year hit a record high at over 6,000. Experts call for a more fundamental approach.
The problem cannot be solved by wildlife management alone. It has to be treated in a much wider context, as part of national agricultural and land planning.
Asian black bears are listed as endangered species in some regions. In Japan, their populations are believed to be growing, though the exact figure is unknown.
Life in Thailand's tourist hotspot Phuket has been flipped upside down by the pandemic. But that's offered a brighter perspective for the Chawley people. They've enjoyed a welcome break from mass tourism as the country was closed to foreign visitors for the past 8 months. However, their way of life remains precarious. Ellen Gainsford has more.
In the turquoise waters of the Andaman Sea in Thailand, Sanan Changman is stalking fish, using a pipe dubbed a thread of life to breathe. With no tourist boats since the beginning of the pandemic 8 months ago, his job has become much easier. Fish stocks are beginning to replenish.
We are surrounded by national parks and tourists. So our fishing zone is normally limited.
Changman is one of the Chawley, or sea gypsies. His ancestors were nomads who came to Thailand from Indonesia 300 years ago. But the recent tourist boom has threatened their way of life.
Our ancestors have lived here for several hundred years. Our ancestors were pioneers here in Phuket, and now the property developers want to kick us out. But we won't let that happen. We lived here before them.
More than 9 million visitors came to Phuket in 2019. The impact on the environment has been devastating. Tourist boats and pollution have destroyed traditional fishing grounds, and there's been a construction frenzy. Property developers have been eyeing the Chao Lei's land, a strip a few hundred meters long facing the sea.
The construction would affect our lives. The property developers would block access to our religious sites, and we wouldn't be able to get through anymore, including to the jetty where we keep our boats. They'd stop us from using them. It'll have a huge impact on our community.
But due to the coronavirus crisis, all building work is now on pause. Members of the Chao Lei community are hoping that the pandemic will make the Thai authorities rethink their attitudes and prioritize protecting their heritage over economic gains.
And we finish with another upbeat story during this pandemic. After testing positive for COVID-19 on the morning of her wedding day, a bride in India was sent to quarantine, heartbroken. But her father and the groom managed to save the day. The couple tied the knot at a COVID-19 care center, decked out in personal protection equipment kits, of course. Now, medical staff closely supervise this ceremony, and what better way to demonstrate in sickness and in health? Thanks for watching. We'll leave you with these images, and please stay tuned to France 24.
Kapisa is a province in eastern Afghanistan. Between 2008 and 2012, France sent hundreds of soldiers there to help the Afghan army fight the Taliban. More than 50 of them lost their lives. France also financed hospitals, schools and clinics. But what's it like in Kapisa now, 8 years after the French left? Our reporters have been there to talk to people about their daily struggles and the ever-present threat from the Taliban. Don't miss Kapisa Revisited on France 24 and France24.com.